This past week, I put out a video where I explored why it is that the movie Venom has such an enormous gap between the critical score and the audience score. The short version of my argument is essentially that audience members choose which movies they want to go see. So if someone chooses to go see Venom, most likely in most cases, they are predisposed to wanting to go see a movie where Venom eats faces. However, critics go and see all movies, whether they like the trailer or not, whether they like the premise or not, and a movie like Venom is going to be a little bit polarizing in its content, and a percentage of audience members aren't going to be interested in seeing a movie like that, but critics have to go see it, so some of them would be predisposed to not liking the film. That's the short version for why I think there was such a big gap for that particular movie, and a lot of people responded well to that argument. However, a lot of people were very quick to point out The Last Jedi, a movie that essentially has the reverse of what I just described, because the critical score is in the 90s and the audience score is quite a bit lower. And its surface value, I think that does kind of review the surface version of the argument that I made, but I had a secondary argument built into what I said before, and that's expectations. Does the movie deliver on what people were anticipating when they went into the film? So let's talk about it. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel essentially because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate to that you like to talk about movies more than the people around you, you're probably in the right place, and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, tell me your thoughts down below. What is your theory as to why there's such an enormous gap between the critical and audience reactions to The Last Jedi? And as I go into my theories on this one, essentially what I'm trying to do is play devil's advocate. I want to look at the critics not as a cynic, not as someone being negative towards them, but my plan is to discuss it from the standpoint of gracious interpretations of their actions and what they might be seeing in the movie and why they would actually legitimately think it's a good movie, whereas many of you think it is dreadful. With that said, let's get started talking about movie critics and the way they watch movies. And as I discussed in an earlier video in this, movie critics, by the nature of what they do, go see all movies, not all movies, but a whole lot of movies of different genres, whether it's one they are immediately inclined to want to go see or not. So they go see 100+ new movies every single year, and they watch them, they analyze them, and they write about them. Different genres, different films, whether they want to see them or not. And when you watch movies like that, you start to notice and appreciate the art of filmmaking a lot more. You start to notice and appreciate storytelling. You start to notice tropes, things that are repeated over and over and over again in movies, and you watch movies differently. And that's not to be condescending, that's not to say that audience members can't do that, but like anyone else, if you do something a lot and spend a lot of time thinking about it, writing about it, talking about it, you start to notice things a lot more. You get a much more refined taste for things. And so when they go see any particular movie, they watch all of them through a certain grid of filmmaking, storytelling, cinematography, and evaluate them on that same playing field. And that's one way to be objective in the way you review movies, is to evaluate them all using this same grid. If you watch a ton of movies, it changes the way you think about, talk about, and evaluate films for better or for worse. So how does the average audience member go and see a movie? Well, most people only see 10 to 20 new movies every year. You might be the exception, but most people, there's just like 1 or 2 movies per month that they go and see in the theater. And they pick movies that they're specifically interested in for a specific experience. If you want to go see a romantic movie on a date night, you're going to go see wanting that experience of, oh, it was a cute, fun, romantic film. If you're in the mood for a kind of darkish comedy with some violent elements, Venom is a movie that might deliver that for you. But they're looking for a specific type of experience when they go to that movie. Those are two very different ways to watch movies. And it's not that audience members can't be critical of the filmmaking in a film, and it's not that critics don't care about the experience and does it deliver what it's supposed to deliver. Of course, both do that, but probably the ratio to which each group is doing that specific thing varies based off of your experience with films. So what's going on with The Last Jedi? Well, by its very nature, Rian Johnson set out to make a movie that subverted our expectations Expectations. Certainly in the grander scheme of the story, it's very reminiscent of The Empire Strikes Back, as well as other elements of Return of the Jedi. But when it comes to specific moments, as people went into this movie, when we think it's gonna go left, he goes right. When we think it's gonna go up, he goes down. So the movie kicks off, and we think Luke Skywalker is going to be the hero that he was before, and now he's cranky. We think that the movie's going to offer an answer as to Rey's parents, and it plays against that expectation and turns that story upside down. We think that we're gonna have this big backstory about who Snoke is, and instead it turns out he's not gonna be the big bad guy of this trilogy after all. It subverts our expectations. So how does a critic go into this movie? Well, they go in expecting a fairly straightforward Star Wars movie that's just like films we've seen before. And in certain ways, it is that because of the similarities to Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And it also has the big action sequence you'd expect. But when it comes to those specific moments, they see someone trying to dig deeper. They see a movie that plays against what we're thinking is going to happen. It actually deconstructs the Jedi and kind of shows kind of the inconsistencies in this world. It has deep themes about broken heroes. It doesn't have nearly as simplistic of an idea of good and bad. And so in a lot of ways, it can be perceived as a far deeper film with much richer themes that are woven throughout the film. And whether you like that or not, whether you think those work or not, whether you think they're good or not, there are very clear themes in the movie that play scene to scene throughout the beginning that kind of make a statement by the end of the film. Likewise, it's probably safe to say that this is the best shot of the Star Wars movies. And there's so many sequences that are really gorgeous. Once again, a critic sees the best looking Star Wars movie that doesn't just play it safe. It throws twists and turns they weren't expecting. It has deep, rich themes inside of it. And so they see a good Star Wars movie, or they see a good film is probably a better way to put it. Star Wars fans take that exact same set of things that made critics go, this is awesome, or this is really good, and their expectation is, I want Luke to be the hero. I want to know who Rey's parents are, and I want another, no, I am your father moment. They want an interesting, deep explanation of who Snoke is. They're looking and expecting really good answers. And they go to the movie, and what do they get? They get the most hopeful hero of the Star Wars universe that through his optimism was able to restore Darth Vader, the person that killed younglings, has been terrorizing the universe for 20 plus years. They get him suddenly giving up on one of his students, attempting to kill him, and becoming so cynical he's given up on the whole thing. He's given up on the Jedi, and when he's handed his lightsaber, he tosses it over his shoulder. Many Star Wars fans naturally feel betrayed by that. Likewise, they had expectations of these big, rich, deep answers to questions. From the series, they were expecting more big, gigantic plot twists and turns like we got in The Empire Strikes Back, like we got in Return of the Jedi. And instead, they get a movie that says, ooh, you're asking the wrong questions. That doesn't matter at all. And so it feels empty and hollow to them. Add to that, there's certainly a sense that there's certain agendas kind of going on in the film. I would argue that there's some pretty significant story problems. What's the end result of that? You have a movie that does have story problems and certainly did not deliver what I was expecting from the film. It's a disappointment. And in certain cases, certain people feel betrayed by the movie. Like, this is ruining Star Wars. Why did you turn Star Wars into this? Why are you making the Jedi seem like the bad guys? Why are you making Luke so grumpy? So they get really mad. And they turn on you, and then they start talking to each other, and they feed off of each other's anger, and next thing you know, you've got a movie that critics saw, and they went, wow, this is a gorgeously shot film that's got deep, rich themes about broken, fallen heroes, and you see a bunch of other people going, how dare you? And I think that's the key of where there's a difference here. Movie critics saw a good movie. Star Wars fans saw a really bad Star Wars movie. It does not deliver what they wanted from a Star Wars film. Of course, there are Star Wars fans that loved this movie. There's critics that didn't like it. People are I'm not trying to oversimplify and say that all audiences hated the movie and all critics loved it. That's not what I'm saying. But why is it that so many critics liked it and so many audience members were livid about it? Expectations. The movie delivered very different things from what people were expecting. And for some people, that was a great thing. And for some people, that was an absolute betrayal. Expectations is an enormous part of what audience scores actually represent. And that's what you have to take into account with a lot of these different movies. And why do you kind of have these different scores? Expectations. So that's my theory on it. Tell me yours down below in the comment section, and check out that playlist right over there of the other videos in this series exploring why it is that there's such a gap between audience and critical scores on some of these movies. Thank you guys so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.